Welcome, viewers and listeners, to CHP Talks. We're here once again with one of our repeat guests, Kris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And Kris, thanks for joining us today. And I'll give you a little bit of an introduction, a little more introduction than that, but thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So Kris Sims, for those who don't know, is the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. She's a longtime journalist in Canada. She was one of the founding reporters for Sun News Network. She's worked in and around government for more than 20 years, and we really value her wisdom. And I just learned just before the meeting here that she's also a competent truck driver, and she's been driving the taxpayers' debt clock around Lethbridge. So that's a great way to enter this conversation. So thanks, Kris. Thanks for driving that debt clock. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it's better to drive the debt clock than to drive the debt. So
yes, it was much more fun to do that. We had a couple of hairy moments up in through the mountain passes there, going in through the Kootenays and up to Coquihalla, but we made it safe and sound, and we're very thankful for that.
So you have the debt clock in the Lower Mainland now in British Columbia?
We actually started the debt clock tour in Victoria at the legislature. Myself and my federal colleague and very dear friend, Franco Terrazzano, started it there. And then we drove it across, went on the ferry, took it to Vancouver, went to Abbotsford, came to my hometown of Hope. I went to Kamloops and all in through the Okanagan, out through the Kootenays. And now they just finished their quick stop there in Medicine Hat. And they're on their way to other smaller locations in Alberta. Franco is trying to get the debt clock to Ottawa in time for the federal budget to be released. Oh, wow.
That's quite a thing. Well, we really appreciate it. I've always thought that debt clock was a marvelous thing. And of course, now you have it also a digital version that any Canadian can tune into at, I think it's debtclock.ca. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is a new debt clock, actually. The Trudeau government broke our last one because we didn't have the physical room. The old debt clock looks like a converted horse trailer, if your viewers are familiar with that. And instead of the windows where you'd usually see happy noses of horses, we had actual physical digital numbers, blocks of them, and there was no room left. Because it's now more than $1 trillion. So we had to make a brand new one.
Yeah, once you hit $1 trillion, you didn't have enough digits there. So, well, thank you for joining us today. I know you have a busy life, and we really appreciate what you contribute to the Canadian conversation. You and your colleagues at Canadian Taxpayers Federation do yeoman's work in helping Canadian taxpayers understand what's going on in our country. A lot of it's not that great, but you do great work exposing it. So what I wanted to specifically ask you about today is S233, and in the House of Commons is a companion bill, C223. I'm not sure why they started in both houses at once, but because it would have to pass in both houses. But anyway, that is for our listeners, and you're going to expound on this and expand on it. It is the universal basic income, or basic livable income for all Canadians without having to work for it. But anyway, why don't you launch us into that? I just, by the way, as I mentioned to you earlier, just put out an article today is on our chp.ca website called the High Cost of Free Money. But I think you're going to add a lot of details to this discussion, which I look forward to hearing.
Well, thank you so much for having us on. Yes, the idea of universal basic income depends on how far back you want to go. If we want to go back to the times of kings and queens, and whether or not people were allowed their allotment every year, it all depends on where you want to go. But for our current discussion, for modern time's sake, the idea most prominently is attributed to the economist Milton Friedman. Now, in his defense, Mr. Friedman had proposed something that often is referred to as a negative income tax. And what that means is, generally speaking, say you earn up to $25,000, $30,000. His idea is that you earn up to that amount, and only after that point do you start paying income taxes. So the idea was that you're still working, you're still out there working and getting your wages. But the moment that you crossed over a certain threshold is the only time you started paying the income tax. And it was a much higher threshold than it is today in Canada. I believe today in Canada, it's in the ballpark of about $12,000 or so. His idea was to set it higher, comparatively speaking, and only then do you start paying income tax. But here's the big catch. He wanted this idea of universal basic income or a negative income tax to replace all other forms of what Americans usually refer to as a social safety net or social security. So it would have replaced what Canadians often refer to as employment insurance. It would have replaced Canada pension. It would have replaced disability payments, anything like that. And so instead of, having all these different layers of bureaucracy and red tape and forms and files to deal with, it's a certain amount that you earn. And then after that, that's when you start paying taxes. And then for the elderly and folks who can't work, it was based on how much you'd worked prior to that. It was a very simple, clear system. The catch is that our good friends across the aisle, as we often like to say, who are usually more left-leaning, they will quote Mr. Friedman and they will say, aha, here's this really smart person who's suggesting universal basic income, but they want to leave everything else along with it. Yeah. We have not yet heard the idea that they want to get rid of the welfare system, employment insurance, maternity leave, pension, none of that. They're just talking about layering a universal basic income on top of all of the other government supplement programs.
We've had, this government has put one tax on top of another, as you know, with the carbon taxes, and they're not averse to layering things if they think it'll sell better. The one difference with this bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is no connection whatsoever to work, whereas what you described Milton Friedman saying is that you would earn up to a certain amount and then you would start paying taxes. But this bill says you don't have to earn anything, that everyone over the age of 17 would just automatically get this basic income. And I'm not sure how that, well, I don't think it's going to work that way. I don't think it could work that way. Comments?
Yes, that's generally what they're suggesting, is that universal basic income, if I can put it in a very clear way, you get paid because you exist.
Yeah.
So if you were living in Canada, you would automatically get money put into your bank account from the government, which of course we know comes from taxpayers, because the government does not have an orchard of money trees that it magically picks it from. Yeah. It is just from taxpayers. And that would be it. Now, for argument's sake, let's look at why they think this would be a good idea. In an idealistic utopia, the idea is that you get a certain basic amount that could maybe cover some of your housing or most of your housing, maybe a bit of your groceries, depending on what region you live in. And here in British Columbia, it would not go far at all. But the idea is that that would free you up to be an artist, to be truly reflective on your life, to read great literature, to perhaps stay home and raise your children, to manage yourself in a more frugal, small living sort of way. That's really the idealistic way of looking at it, is that if you're living below a certain line of money and it's a certain amount, say 25,000 or below, that you tread lightly on the earth, and that you can live in a quiet way and pursue other things. So you could be that block watch parent all the time and dedicate your time to it. You could work, on the parent teacher council all the time in a more wholesome, fulsome way. Unfortunately, as we have seen with other experiments in other countries, it doesn't usually work that way. And for example, I believe it was Norway. I'm almost positive it was Norway. They had to abandon their study of universal basic income because it just wasn't working. It was leading to too much expenditure, and the people who did have to do the work obviously didn't like having to pay the people who weren't working in the same capacity that they were. So it caused a sense of inequity. And speaking personally, I've been working and being paid to work since I was about 12.
Mhm.
And not just babysitting. I mean, training people how to ride horses, hard labor of mucking out the stalls. I was even driving the feed truck as a 12-year-old out on the ranch. And that sense of purpose, that sense of pride of doing something for a reason, it really matters. I know it matters to me.
Yeah.
And philosophically, I know a lot of us, we hesitate to implement the idea that you can just be paid for existing and not have to work for that money.
Yeah.
So personally speaking, I have a lot of concerns over this on what it would do, not just to the, get up and go, work ethic, but to individuals who feel that they don't need to work or to contribute in that very clear way in exchange of work or effort or intellect, in exchange for money, for payment.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it works pretty well doing that.
Well, I think every human being does have a sense of pride in the things they accomplish, even if it is not paid work, but, people get into volunteer organizations and do whatever they do. A child, when he's created a painting for his mom for Mother's Day or whatever, I mean, you've accomplished something, right? You've done something, and even better if you've done something for somebody else, not just for yourself. But we are made to work. We're designed. I mean, we believe that we're uniquely designed by a creating God who also works. Jesus said he works and his Father works, and we're made in his image. I think we're only happy when we can be productive in some way, shape, or form. And that is the way the world works. So I have a real concern, and we saw maybe a little shadow of it with the CERB payments, where the government was paying people to stay home and not work. And I don't know what the end result of that will be, but I know there's been a disruption in how businesses conduct themselves. I've noticed in various fast food places, they've gotten used to only having one person behind the till. And even though it's very inconvenient sometimes for customers, the bosses maybe think it's okay. But what about the individual who did have a job and no longer has a job? And I don't know how that's all going to sort out. We've had a lot of disruption in the last 2 years, and I think it's going to take a long time to get everybody back on track and, back doing productive work. But in the meantime, we've added how much in the last 2 years? You probably have a rough ballpark figure how much we've added to the national debt.
Just hundreds of billions of dollars. To give you a better ballpark, since 2015, we have almost doubled the federal debt.
Yeah,
it's a staggering amount, sir. I've spent so much time next to the debt clock, and I've spoken with Franco so many times. It's $4,500 per second. Per second. It's more than $1 trillion right now, our federal debt. And to put that in perspective, it's hard for me to really conceive of $1 trillion. How big is $1 trillion? Well, if you and I started counting right now, it would take us 30,000 years to count to $1 trillion.
Wow.
It's a staggering amount of money. And we want to be clear, folks who are saying things like, oh, well, what did you want us to do? The government was locking people in their homes. They were shutting down businesses. It was no fault of their own. We understand. We know that money did need to be spent. And we do want a reckoning in the future to find out exactly where it went, to make sure that, forbid, if we ever have to do this again, that we do it much better. Yeah. But to be clear, in 2018, so if we think back what life was like in 2018, thank goodness there was no pandemic, there were no lockdowns, thank goodness there was no massive natural disaster, we weren't being invaded, things were good, comparatively speaking. And I will point out, the US economy was at top notch, all systems firing. So when our biggest trading partner, closest ally, and best friend is doing that well in an economy, we should have been making hay while the sun shone. Yeah. We should have been saving it up and paying it down. But in the year 2018, The federal government spent more money in that year than in any one year of the Second World War or any of our recessions adjusted for inflation and population.
Wow.
That is irresponsible. There's no other way of describing it. It's absolutely irresponsible level of spending. When times were good, everyone knows from common sense. When times are good, you've got to be careful and be frugal and save your money because you know the rainy day is coming. And boy, did that rainy day hit us and we were not ready. And all they did was just keep ratcheting it up.
I think there was a childhood story, wasn't it, about the ant and the grasshopper?
That's right.
And the ant kept working through the summer, and the grasshopper said, "What are you doing that for?" And, "Well, I'm saving up for the winter." And we've had years where this country could have been significantly paying down the debt, and it didn't. And of course, the tendency, it's always bothers me, the temptation for politicians to promise people things with other people's money. And then when if they follow through with that, they're basically robbing from future generations, because somebody's children and grandchildren are going to have to pay for this massive debt.
Yes, they will. And this is what I think is mind-boggling to a lot of people. We also break down on the debt clock. We'll show it running up in real time because it's connected to a computer website and a program, and it by the miracle of technology. And we can see it running up in real time. And then we portion out your portion. Now, to be clear, it's a very conservative low estimate because we do it per Canadian, like per population. And we know not everybody, of course, is a taxpayer. Some people are minor children, others are not on the rolls, all that. And it's still $30,000 a piece.
Wow.
And that's just the federal debt. That's not including provincial levels of debt. It's interesting you bring up the ant and the grasshopper. It's one of my favorite fables, and it's ancient. We should all try to be ants. We should really be the ones that are very prudently planning, trying to save as best we can for a rainy day, and not be the grasshopper. But we've been run by grasshoppers now for several years, and it's really showing. And as my friend Franco will point out, it isn't just the debt, because it's a scary looking number. We are financing our own deficits by, as they say, printing more money. A lot of folks don't realize this, that the Bank of Canada is whirring up the printing press. And in many cases, they're using that extra money to buy up government debt. So that is causing and adding to inflation. So that means that that money that, we're trying to save is worth less and less and less, both in our savings accounts and when we go to the grocery store. So it's not just the problem and the fear of future debt, which makes anybody have a terrible pit in their stomach, and the irresponsible spending. It's the fact that they're spending this much money at all that is helping to push along inflation and making things at the grocery store cost more.
Yeah, and add that in with the carbon tax, which is a direct increase in our cost of fuel, transportation, heating, but an indirect hit or increase in our cost of groceries, anything that is delivered by trucks, which is pretty well everything. And then if you add the, I'm not sure the term, but the inflationary effect of the additional money coming into the system, it's quite disturbing.
It is. It's a perfect storm. My hope is that somehow interest rates stay low through all of this, but we're in for some very choppy weather here. I'm old enough to remember what it was like in the early 80s when we had double-digit interest. I remember my family, worried about being able to pay the mortgage. I don't want to see those times again, but at this point, we need to have some drastic action to reverse this course. I'll put it that way. And your points on the carbon tax are very good to really express this. If you eat or use anything, the carbon taxes make your life cost more. Even if you ride your own secondhand bike, and God love you for doing it, your groceries will cost more because of these carbon taxes. Not only because of the carbon taxes, because in British Columbia we have two. We have carbon taxes on diesel, Okay. We have carbon tax on natural gas, which the grocery store largely uses to both heat and cool. And a lot of folks don't know this. Farmers, they dry their product, usually using natural gas. Sometimes it's propane, but usually natural gas. I've seen some of those bills. They're being hit with the carbon tax. And a lot of folks wouldn't think that. I wouldn't think so, because they usually get colored fuel to deal with their farm trucks and their tractors and stuff. But no, for some reason, it was a strange loophole that the bureaucrats overlooked when they first implemented it. And in some cases, it's causing these farmers thousands and thousands of dollars to dry their grain. And what eats grain? Everybody. We either eat it directly or it's fed to the livestock, which then makes them cost more. And then when they're being trucked in, that's another cost there. And so that is contributing to this increasing cost of living.
You think, and I know the tendency of our government and U.S. government and maybe everyone around the world wanting now to blame this stuff on the Ukraine situation, on Russia. Well, it's Putin's fault that these prices are going up. I mean, obviously that is a contributing factor, but these cycles, these trends were in effect long before Putin crossed the border into Ukraine. But governments will cling to excuses and rather than accept the blame or accept responsibility for their actions. They will point to others and say it's because of this, it's because of this. But what has to happen, and I know you can't wave a magic wand and make it happen. How can a government begin to back up and number one, apologize? I'm not really expecting that, but number two, begin to make good decisions to bring down the debt. I mean, that involves balancing the budget. That involves cutting off programs probably that some people don't want cut off, and so that has a negative political. Politicians don't like to back off on things. They don't always keep their promises, but they don't want to back off on things that will win them votes. How do we get through that impasse? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, there's an excellent report, again, that my colleague Franco Terrazzano had put together. He has his background in economics, by the way, so we're lucky to have him. And not only do we do the fun stuff, as we'd like to call it fun, driving the debt clock around and raising awareness, we do the deep dive stuff. And he wrote about a 65-page pre-budget report with graphs and charts and data and numbers. And he presented it to the Finance Committee on Parliament Hill just before he landed out here, and we took off together in the truck. Okay. And within that report are excellent suggestions. Off the top of my head, if they went back to, I believe it was either 2018 or 2019 levels of spending. So again, halcyon level spending, lots of rolling around in money spending. If they went back to that level of spending, they'd balance the budget. Wow. Done. So, but if we want to get into savings, that's where we get into the real meaty stuff. So number one, stop corporate welfare. For goodness sake, do not be giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the Ford Motor Corporation, one of the most richest companies on planet Earth. Don't do silly things like that. No. Don't spend, millions of dollars on the Mission Cultural Fund, which, among other things, flies Canadian chefs around the world at Canadian taxpayers' expense the moment some diplomat gets peckish and needs some food. They also spend taxpayers' money through the Mission Cultural Fund. How do I put this well? Funding very inappropriate art shows, I'll put it that way, in Europe. Taxpayers' money is going to this stuff. Mm-hmm. Don't spend it on those silly things. If you want to get into bigger ticket items, stop funding the CBC. I'm not sure where you are on that, but here at the Taxpayers Federation, it's $1.4 billion a year that we don't need to be spending.
We're absolutely with you on that. Not for two reasons. One is it's a waste of money. And number two, that money is being used against us. From our point of view, many of the policies that we propose are attacked by the CBC. Many of the things that we are concerned about are promoted by the CBC. I think it's not only a terrible waste of taxpayers' money, but it's very rude. It's very insulting to take my tax dollars and use them to oppose the things that I believe would make this country a better place to live in.
And that's a very salient point, sir, because it should get right down to what you want your money going towards for your media. Canadians should be able to choose to donate either, to this broadcast, to the Taxpayers Federation, to more left-wing outlets, Canada Land, if they want to True North, any of that. If they want to contribute their own money of their own choice, by all means, let's do it. So our concern there is twofold. Financially, it's a huge waste of money. And it's having children. I'll put it that way. Not only do we give $1.4 billion to the CBC, but now those goalposts have moved. And about $600 million has gone out the door to private media companies.
Right.
And even I can speak to this as a journalist. I was a journalist, right in there as a court reporter, town hall, you name it. I'm the one that was carrying the microphone and the notepad. Even if that reporter was doing their darndest to be as balanced and as fair and as open-minded and objective as possible, the perception of bias is still there. If you're taking the state money, that perception of bias is still there, no matter how hard you work or what you do. And so that undermines the true spirit of independent journalism. And we don't want to see that. So that's one side of it. And on the other side of it, they've got Bill C-10, which has now been reintroduced as Bill C-11 after the election. It's a note for your viewers. And that's the anti-free speech law. And they're trying to come after folks, for example, having a conversation like this. If there's a video that's been posted online that a bureaucrat within the CRTC, this is proposed legislation, decides is harmful or hurtful or whatever language they want to use, they can make it not be there. That's not good. That is an attack on free expression and free speech. We are actively fighting it here at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation because we think it's fundamental in order to be able to hold our governments to account. We don't care which government it is. It could be Liberal, NDP, Flying Monkey Party. We don't mind which one, but we need to be able to speak our mind and hold politicians to account. And if this bill goes through, it'll be a lot harder to do that. And so that's all part and parcel of spending money much more wisely, not throwing it away on things like this, and bringing ourselves back within our means. And as far as money coming in goes, if I can get into that, do you still have time?
Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
Stop strangling our natural resources.
Yep.
I'll give you an example of the Trans Mountain Pipeline is a perfect example of this. So we had 5 years of green lights from various levels of government, both federal and provincial. Kinder Morgan, it's a private company. They owned the pipeline that is now called Trans Mountain that runs from Edmonton all the way down in through the Rockies, across British Columbia and out to Burnaby here in BC. They owned it. They were twinning it. So right alongside of its existing pipeline, they're simply using a bit more space and twinning it so that they can increase the capacity because it's mixed use pipe. They could put bitumen down there, oil down there, gasoline products, you name it, to get it out both to the refinery in Burnaby, which would produce more stuff so that we can use it, both gasoline, diesel, you name it, and to be able to export it to foreign markets. So not only does that increase our royalties, our royalty fees coming from that, but the income taxes alone being paid by the men and women who have these great jobs working on this pipeline would be able to afford building new hospitals, building new schools, or paying down the debt. But what did we do? The federal government gave them yes, yes, yes for 5 years, then suddenly dragged their feet so deep and so hard for so long that the Kinder Morgan said, you know what, we can't afford this. They gave up, threw their hands in the air and walked away. Taxpayers then paid for the thing, purchased the existing pipeline, and now we're on the hook to get it finished. That is just a colossal waste of money. It's more than $10 billion now, $10 billion. And instead of allowing a private company on their own hook completely to pay people good wages and to contribute to our tax base, we're now putting money out. That's madness. And it's illogical thinking like that that is helping to cause this debt to go up so fast.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. And my heart sank when the government purchased that Trans Mountain pipeline. Because I knew, like you did, that it would go this way. The government is not designed to run a business. They shouldn't be running even a lemonade stand. They should be creating a level playing field and getting out of the way for good people to do what they're designed to do, to get in there, roll up their sleeves, and make a product and sell it, right? And
Amen.
so,
My uncle used to say the government couldn't organize a 2-car parade.
yeah, well,
And
that's
it's true.
about it.
You know,
Yeah,
to that point, they can't even pay their people right. You know, look
no,
at the Phoenix Pay system. All it was a payroll software system. And it's billions, it's eye-watering amount of money. And that's just the pay process.
yeah.
It's unbelievably wasteful.
No, it's tragic. Well, you've touched on many things, and each one of them deserved. We could spend more time on each one of them. This censorship of public opinion, especially public opinion that is contrary to the existing government,
Mhm.
and the censorship. By the way, we're already feeling it. Bill C-11 has not passed yet, but we're feeling the pressure in social media. YouTube has given us warnings about things we
Mm.
were talking about. And of course, this whole COVID vaccine, the mandates, all that stuff. There's many levels that we could unravel there. But the fact is, the government does not want Canadians to even be able to discuss these things. And as far as corporate welfare, you could even maybe point to Pfizer. It's not maybe exactly welfare, but our government has purchased so much of Pfizer's experimental product that I think there's now some pressure just to use it up, just to put it into people's arms because we bought it, and what are we going to do with it if we don't use it, right? But anyway, many, many ways that money is being wasted, and the human spirit is being curtailed and imposed upon and diminished because the government wants to control the way we spend our money, the way we spend our time. And we're so thankful, Kris, that you and Franco and others at Canadian Taxpayers are doing what you're doing. We're always, we get 10 copies of your taxpayer magazine and distribute them to local people here. I take them with me when I travel, and I tell people about taxpayers because you are doing a job that nobody else is doing. At least nobody else is doing the way you're doing it, and it's tremendous. Some of those stories that you highlight, the exposing some of the most ridiculous ways that the government is wasting taxpayers' money is very important. So thanks for joining us today. Taxpayer.com is your website. Excuse me. Anything else that you want to say before we close off for today?
I just wanted to say, personally speaking, I know that the past 2 years have been very difficult, to put things mildly. My phone number is very prominent. You can find it very quickly. And I've lost count of the number of people who have called me thinking I'm a government type person and can help. You're the tax lady. Can you help me? And it's not with their taxes. I'll put it that way. There are people who are in bad places. They're struggling. They're down. And I just wanted to give them some encouragement. You're not alone. You're not alone. There are tens of thousands of people who have been through similar situations like you, and we can fight. We can fight with joy in our hearts and with straight spines. And this is why we do this. And so I just wanted to give them some encouragement that even doing something as simple as writing a letter to your member of parliament, picking up the phone and phoning your MLA, even arranging a meeting with them in person at their office can help you. It gives you back a sense of your own agency, your own power. You won't feel as helpless. You won't feel as alone. Even if they disagree with you, you will be strengthened by speaking that truth to power. And it's one of our roles at the Taxpayers Federation. You can go to our website. There's a whole toolkit on how to write a firm but polite letter, how to make that phone call, how to get involved with local ratepayer organizations, and that will help. It will help. It may not change things overnight, but if you feel like you're part of a solution, it's easier to get up out of bed in the morning, and it's certainly easier to sleep at night. And I just wanted to reach out to those folks who I know are in some dark places, because I've talked to dozens of them, that there is a way of pushing back, and in a very meaningful way that affects change. So please do go to our website.
Very good. Taxpayer.com. Yeah, that's so important. Sometimes people say, well, I don't think it does any good if I write or if I call or visit. But the converse is definitely true. If you do not call, if you do not write, then you give your member of parliament an excuse to say nobody has complained about this. And if you let them know, and you talk to your neighbor, and you start getting a copy of the Canadian Taxpayer magazine and give this information out, you'll be surprised how many people do not know this stuff. And you listeners can become the source or the spigot that distributes this information to your friends and neighbors. And don't worry about, if your MP makes you feel like he or she is too busy to talk to you, and they're very busy. Okay, maybe they're busy, but they're making $186,000 a year, and you're helping to pay their salary. I think they owe you a few minutes to discuss the things that you're concerned about. If
I can give a little hint, if you're getting the sense that your MP or your MLA is ignoring you, actively ignoring you, a good thing to say to them is that you're going to organize a door knocking campaign during the next election. And you'll be surprised on how quickly they get back to you. Because it's getting out the vote that matters, that helps these folks keep those $180,000 plus jobs. And I know it sounds cynical, and perhaps they simply need to be led back to the right path. And that little reminder of, you know what, my friends and neighbors are going to get together, we're going to start at Tim Hortons, and we're going to do a door knocking campaign. And you're riding during this next election, explaining exactly what you're not doing right. You'll be surprised on how quickly they pick up the phone. And it'll help you. It will help you feel better. And so just thank you so much for allowing us the time to reach out to your listeners and to your viewers. And I truly hope that the next few months are getting brighter and brighter for many people.
Yeah, very good, Kris. Well, with the onset of spring and summer, I think seeing more sunshine helps all of us, and watching things begin to grow. And we hope our economy will begin to grow up from where it's been in the last couple of years. So thanks again, Kris Sims, BC Director for Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.